Reverend Aaron Payson, will you tell us who you are and where you are in the work that you do that brings you to this conversation today about domestic violence and reproductive dignity?
I have in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I have served for the last 20 years, been active in a variety of community organizations, including the YWCA's Domestic Violence Task Force, which started as the Daybreak Breakfast Committee, and it's a group that works with the local YWCA in their efforts to continue to provide a comprehensive spectrum of services for women and others who experience intimate partner violence and domestic violence in a variety of forms. So dignity, I think, is the quality of being that allows that process of decision-making or promotes that process of decision-making in a non-coercive manner in whatever way that coercion can be experienced.
For us, what's the connection then between reproductive dignity and domestic violence when you think of quality of life and coercion and the concepts you talked about?
So, the Centers for Disease Control has some interesting statistics, such like, 48% of women in the United States have experienced intimate partner violence in the form of psychological aggression. Right? 24% of women in the U.S. have experienced severe physical violence, and 9% rape. And that reality of the kind of trauma that women experience in the United States also lends itself toward 10.3 million women have had a partner who tried to get them pregnant against their will. So there's one dynamic.
Say that number again.
10.3 million women in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control, have had a partner who tried to get them pregnant against their will or who refused to wear a condom.
Wow, that's astounding. That's astounding.
And so when we talk about dignity, right, we're really talking about the ability to be able to engage in relationships that are non-coercive, right? That's one of the first principles. Here is a direct link to reproductive justice, and it has to do with the kind of power that is projected into relationships to try to control women and their reproductive decision-making and potential. Add to that 2.1 million who have become pregnant as a result of rape by an intimate partner. Or 1.8 million who have contracted an STD as a result of rape of an intimate partner. Okay, and we begin to see that the reality of domestic violence has a significant impact on women and on their reproductive rights and the reproductive potential. And it comes in the form, we've been talking about reproductive justice. What we're describing here, what I understand to be described here, is reproductive oppression. And so it is that aspect of reproductive justice that speaks to the reality of reproductive oppression. Rape leads itself to sexual abuse, the forms of intimate partner violence that we need to be able to attend to are all part of this milieu that we're talking about in terms of the difference between reproductive dignity and reproductive oppression.
Okay. I'm so appreciating everything that you're sharing. This is powerful information. And as I'm listening to you, two thoughts come to mind. One, I was in New York City when the World Trade Center was destroyed. And in the context of all of the terror, fear that were in the air in New York City, domestic violence rates skyrocketed.
Yes.
And so here we are, a society in which male partners in particular, and I know it's not exclusive to male partners,
Mm-hmm.
when they're feeling stressed, anxious, whether it is about something in their work lives, their financial lives, something that's happening in the broader US context, that violence then gets meted out upon the individual one partner that they're with. And as you were
Yep.
talking about the racial differences, the Alaskan Native American, where the incidences of alcoholism, suicide, and domestic violence are so high because of the extreme marginalization and poverty within those communities, and similarly with Black communities. So as we're looking at reproductive dignity, domestic violence, there's this intersection with a range of issues in our culture.
I helped to work the hotline that we had for people that were calling that wanted to speak to a religious professional around a reproductive crisis issue.
Mhm.
And I remember receiving a phone call one day from a woman who was just absolutely distraught. She was in a relationship, in a marriage where she had 3 small children and she was just found out she was pregnant with a 4th. She was describing her life in terms of her, just the bare capacity she had to care for the 3 children she had, not having the economic means, and having a partner who would essentially have done physical violence to her if he found out that she was pregnant with a 4th and was considering an abortion.
Mhm, mhm.
And the absolute fear, on the one hand, of the partner's response to what she needed to, and the agony of making that decision in real. But her whole thinking was, I have 3 children I have to care for, that I am, and that I need to make them a priority, was her thinking around this. And we talked about all of the various responses that one could have to this reality and what they would mean for her and her family and her circle. And it was very clear that she really was intended to have an abortion, and she was trying to figure out a way to do it without causing physical harm to happen to herself or her family, which was her challenge. And so I put her in touch with a provider that I knew, who could work with her in terms of not just her medical needs, but also in terms of safety planning around this with her and her family. And that was sort of the biggest contrast to me, that, not only are there situations where women experience intimate partners, impregnating them against their will or without their knowledge, or refusing to engage in safe sex practices.
Mhm, mhm.
But the coercion of, once you're pregnant, there's only one response, and not willing to engage in any kind of thinking about the psychological reality, the economic reality, the spiritual reality, the physical nature of this in any way other than the way the oppressor, under the circumstances, is willing to consider what's right and wrong. I said to her, you made the choice to want to speak to someone who's a religious professional. What's going on for you spiritually with this?
Yes.
Um, and her response was just very straightforward and very, they're just full of the integrity of a woman seeking to find the best path forward. And she said, listen, I've already made a decision. I want to know, in carrying this out, if I'm still a child of God.
Yes. Yes. And what was your
I
response to her?
my response to her was, you have been, are, and will always be a child of God.
Yeah.
and that part of the way that we manifest that understanding, that knowledge, is by welcoming God as a companion through this process, and recognizing that that is a strength that we can rely on, our belief that we are held in the arms of a loving entity. In those situations where women are experiencing violence on behalf that's being committed to them by men, in traditions that fundamentally represent the divine as male, there is a conflagration in scenarios like this
Yes.
of the abuse not just being physical, but that somehow they deserve it. That this is part of the paradigm that they've been taught religiously, and so the idea that this kind of dominance and control is somehow being divinely, inspired, or has divine authority because of the way in which traditions have taught them to think,
Yes. Yes.
is another aspect of abuse, and I call it spiritual abuse.
Yes. Yes. I'm thinking about the different ways that many of us conceive and understand God, and they fall in two categories for me. And this is an oversimplification, of course, but there's this understanding of God as judge who is punitive and who insists upon people doing things only one way,
Mm-hmm.
and they are going to be punished if they don't do things that one way. And then there's this other concept of God as companion, as you spoke, and God of compassion, who understands, and I really appreciate your words, Reverend Aaron, the God who appreciates the complexities of our lives even more than we understand those complexities. That is powerful. I hope you're going to preach that, but I love that. The God who understands the complexities of our lives even more than, and who's not judging us regarding those complexities. How did it get this complex? You must have done something wrong,
Yeah.
What? So if there were one thing that you would recommend, urge spiritual leaders and faith communities regarding their approach to domestic violence and ways that they might help eliminate it, what would that recommendation be?
So I'm going to put this in a context that I work with also, which is congregations that experience trauma. And to say to my brothers and sisters in ministry, the largest percentage of deadly force incidents that occur on church properties are related to domestic violence spillover. And so this is a reality that we have to face, not just because we care for, and fundamentally that we care for the people we serve individually, but as a community, this is a reality that we will face if we do not do this work in ways that will make for a larger community kind of trauma that none of us wants to have to face. And what I teach congregations across the country is, if you want to respond to the possibility of violence on church property, the first thing you need to do is attend to the reality of domestic violence in your community and in your congregations. And so what that means for colleagues is preach about being a child of God, preach about the reality of domestic violence, preach about the way in which the congregation can support and love and work with people through it. Know what is going on in the families that you serve and be able to help provide safe space for them. Yes. and to be able to companion them through this process. That is the biggest thing that we can do, and to make certain that our communities we have communities that have services so that this full range of responses to reproductive challenge and reproductive crises and reproductive decision making are available, and that they're safe and that they're legal.
And thank you so very, very much. We need more of these conversations. And I love you, Aaron.
Yes, right back at you.
Right back. And thank you so very much for this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you.